Hello, my name's Ben,
And my name's Josh.
and welcome back to FPL Graduates, and welcome back to another Game Week Guide video. Of course, with the international break having been or is currently going on, we'll get into some of the questions that you've got ahead of the next game week. Very much looking forward to getting back into some FPL action.
Yes, indeed. So, yeah, getting into this week's Game Week guide. I've got a bit of a cold at the moment, so sorry if I sound a bit muffled. Hopefully, it won't be as bad next week. You just have to put up with it for this week. Coming up first, we're going to talk about some of the Chelsea assets. They're obviously quite big at the moment because the fixture swing is pretty good. Forest away going into Game Week 8 is the first game of the game week. A few players are less affected than others due to the international duty. Caicedo being one of those not as affected because he hasn't travelled and gone on international duty, which is obviously a massive benefit for Chelsea being able to give him a rest, given how crucial he has been to their success so far this season. Obviously, off the back of a goal against Liverpool, which was unbelievable strike, really, really good. He's picked up 3 goals now so far this season, only from an XG of 0.53, but when he's smashing them in from 25 yards, you'd expect it to be quite a low XG opportunity. Obviously, DEFCONs are fairly consistent with him. I think he's hit them in 54% of his matches overall so far, but he's averaging 13.7 a game, so you'd imagine over a longer period of time, that percentage is only going to increase. What's your thoughts on him, Ben? Obviously, 5.7 million. He's had a couple of price rises. The fixtures are there. Do you think the attacking returns are sustainable enough, or do you think he's going to maybe regress and just be that sort of DEFCON magnet that we thought?
Yeah, I think we'll see the sort of the goals sort of slow down a little bit because it's not that sustainable, the rate of goals he's scoring compared to the XG. So it means at the moment he's averaging like over 6 points a game. I think that'll lower to 5 and maybe even 4 points a game over the coming weeks, which still isn't bad for a midfielder to have those averages. It's just we're seeing, probably half a season, if not 3 quarters of a season worth of goals that we'd usually see from Caicedo in the first 7 games, which is not something that we've seen too much before. And look, if he starts sort of bucking the trend and doing it every week, then we need to sort of have some consideration about it. But for me, I don't think it's that sustainable. At 5.7 million, he's a good priced option to bring in and out of your team, but I wouldn't necessarily rush straight into buying him.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Obviously, another midfield pick that a lot of people are looking towards at the moment is also Enzo Fernandez. He's a little bit more pricier at 6.8 million, so 1.1 million more than Caicedo. Obviously, he's a little bit further forward on the pitch. He's had 3 goals and 2 assists so far this season. We saw him take the most recent penalty for Chelsea. Obviously, with no Cole Palmer, that sort of job is up for grabs. I'd say it's still not certain that Enzo Fernandez is the default penalty taker. I think there's every chance that we could see João Pedro take them as well, and that could be a sort of a rotation style. I think a few people have mentioned that João Pedro sort of gave him the nod to take the penalty when he scored in that fixture. I think it was against Fulham. So yeah, for me, I think I wouldn't be buying him on that basis of penalty taken alone. I think from open play, you're still going to get some threat from him. He hit the post against Liverpool as well. Obviously, the XG does include his penalty, so take that with a slight pinch of salt. It's a little bit higher than what you'd really expect it. What's your thoughts on him, Ben? This is a midfielder who's not going to really get you too many DEFCONs, so you're really relying on him to step up from that attacking point of view.
Yeah, you're definitely relying on that from an attacking point of view, but the attacking numbers are a lot more sustainable in terms of the underlying stats than Caicedo, which is what you're going to have to bear in mind. And it's going to be a very 50-50 decision because a lot of managers are going to bring Chelsea assets in. And I do think if you've got that money and you are going to go for a midfielder from Chelsea, I think Enzo's probably going to be the best of the bunch to go for. I think as soon as he hits sort of 7 million plus, then there's question marks on whether he's going to be worth that value. But at the moment, I do think he's decent enough value to go for. Of course, we'll have to just wait and see whether he plays whether he plays in the international break, and then off the back of that, there's not much recovery time between Argentina's game that got rescheduled. So he's not finished until the early hours of Wednesday morning and that early game on the Saturday. So we'll just have to wait and see on that. I think for long term, Enzo is going to be a decent option nonetheless.
Yeah, and then on to our third and final Chelsea asset. I mentioned him when talking about Enzo. It's João Pedro. A lot of people asking whether they should sell him at the moment. For me, he's probably a keep still. Obviously, we weren't really expecting too much against Liverpool. I think it's just the lack of shots that people are getting a bit frustrated with. That being said, Chelsea were down to 10 men for large majorities of the games against United and then against Brighton. I think you got to sort of bear that in mind. He would obviously have had shots in those games if it wasn't due to having less players. Liverpool's obviously a tough fixture. Despite Chelsea winning, it's not going to be one of those where he's getting off shots left, right, centre. What I would say is that the XG is fairly low considering how many minutes he's played so far this season. Especially when you think about that they won by 5 goals against West Ham. You maybe would say that should maybe be a little bit higher. But say if he takes the penalty against Fulham instead of Enzo Fernandez, it could be a whole world different. So yeah, for me, he's definitely a hold with the fixtures coming up. What about you, Ben?
Yeah, I think he's a hold. I don't think it is sort of if you haven't got him rush in to buy him this week. But yeah, I anticipate that those underlying numbers will improve over the coming games. Look, Chelsea have had a fairly tough start to the season, compiled in with like a red card every game. It's going to make it a little bit difficult for João Pedro to accumulate too much in terms of attacking returns and underlying stats. So for me, I do think he's still a really good option. I'm happy to remain patient with him. Don't understand those that are looking to shift him on because the options at that price point at striker are fairly limited anyway. Okay, so moving on into the Arsenal attackers, and of course we saw a fixture swing for Arsenal fairly recently, which means our attention does now come to them. Bukayo Saka has looked very good since returning from his injury. Got a lot more minutes potentially than we expected initially, which is good to see in the Premier League. He's been given rest in midweek in Champions League and of course played a little bit in the EFL Cup as well. In the minutes that he's played, the XG and the XA looks genuinely fantastic. Of course, got the nod for the penalty. Whether we see that long term for Arsenal, we'll have to wait and see. But it looks like Bukayo Saka wants to be seen as that main man for Arsenal and that talismanic figure. So it could be that he takes more penalties going forward. Again, it's pretty up in the air now because it was sort of fairly not decided, but looked fairly likely that Gyökeres was going to take. But Bukayo Saka taking that penalty does switch things up just a little bit. Of course, underwent some price changes as well since that goal. Josh, what's your thoughts on Bukayo Saka as an option? Obviously, we've got limited minutes to go off, but the signs look fairly promising.
Yeah, absolutely. The expected numbers are fantastic. Obviously, the goal threat slightly increased due to that penalty, but overall, the fact that he's not got an assist yet from 1.45 XA is quite remarkable. I know he set up a couple of big chances, I think, for Gyökeres against West Ham, so that's probably where a large majority of that has come from. The fixtures right now for Arsenal are good. I wouldn't say they're great over the next two. They're quite tough defences to play in Fulham and Crystal Palace. But after that, it is really good. Obviously, Burnley kicks off again a nice turn of fixtures again for the Arsenal attackers. 9.7% owned is what really attracts me to Saka at the moment. Is why I'd be tempted to go in my team for a double up in attack rather than defence. It's just for the ownership. We can see this Arsenal team definitely scoring goals this season. No doubt they'll keep clean sheets too, but I think when you factor in the fact that he's less than 10% owned, his potential for penalties like Ben was mentioning. I think the fact that it's his decision is what it seemed like on the pitch that day. It just sort of shows that he's if he wants to take a penalty, he will take the penalty, which does lessen the stocks of Gyökeres. We'll talk about him in a moment, but also that's an even better reason to get Bukayo Saka. He's cheaper than what he started as at the start of the season as well, 9.9 million. So yeah, for me at the moment, he would be my go-to Arsenal asset if I was picking one fresh right now. Obviously, I mentioned Victor Gyökeres. We thought he was on penalties. A Swedish journalist said that he was, but yeah, Saka sort of took the initiative and was saying, nope, they are mine. So yeah, it's interesting with Gyökeres. I still quite big on him, to be honest. He's had 2 big chances in that game against West Ham, missed both of them. Bit unfortunate for owners, but I'd much rather a striker who's missing big chances than one that's not getting any at all. So yeah, in that team, he's going to get lots of chances. I think he's definitely going to be scoring goals like we've seen so far this season. He's scoring against pretty weak opposition. Arsenal have weak opposition coming up in a few game weeks time. So yeah, for me, he's still going to stay in my team. I'm not worried about selling him or anything like that. I think he's close to a price rise back down to 9 million, but that doesn't affect anyone who bought him for 9 million anyway. What's your thoughts on him, Ben, as either maybe a double Arsenal attack or it's double Arsenal defence?
Yeah, I mean, it does make a sort of decent case, especially with the fixtures coming up, to maybe double up on the attack, just given that Arsenal are scoring goals. They're not looking too bad. They're looking better than they did last season going forwards, that's for sure. We'll have to wait and see. Hopefully they do get on sort of consistently well against the lower block teams, because there's going to be a couple in the next 5 games where they do face a real low block that they've got to try and break down. I do think Gyökeres is still a good option. He's matching his XG expectations so far, which is to be expected. Of course, a couple of big misses in there, but I do think he is a sustainable striker option where there is actually not that many options in FPL right now outside of Haaland. So I do think he's a good option, definitely a consideration to double up in the attack. For me, like I said last week, my preference is on Bukayo Saka, but I do see the merit in going with Victor Gyökeres.
Indeed. And then obviously we spoke about the defence. Gabriel is sort of the mainstay there at the moment. He's played every single Premier League minute so far this season, coming away with 5 returns in those 7 games, should I say? Sorry, which is definitely nothing to be sniffed at. Like we say, the fixtures from an attacking point of view over the next 2 are tough. What I would say from a defensive point of view is that I could easily see them getting a clean sheet away at Fulham. Fulham obviously without Raul Jimenez before the break. Not sure on the update on him as we stand at the recording of this, but even in general, Fulham aren't a team that go and smash teams and score loads of goals. So yeah, wouldn't surprise me if they kept a clean sheet there. Equally as well, Crystal Palace, albeit in fine form, obviously before losing to Everton, I still think there's it's a different beast playing this Arsenal team, and it's at the Emirates, which I think is quite key. Just from a point of view of Arsenal, they need to win those games if they're going to win the Premier League title. One thing of note of Gabriel so far this season compared to last is that he's averaging nearly 10 DEFCONs per 90, which is a vast improvement on last season where he was only averaging 6 across the whole season. Obviously, it's a smaller sample size, so you've got to bear that into consideration. But it's positive news for anyone who's owning Gabriel or indeed looking to own Gabriel. What's your thoughts on him, Ben? Do you think he's the best Arsenal defender?
Yeah, he is, but of course he's also becoming just that sort of quite expensive now for FPL managers to bring him in if they haven't done already, especially if you're looking at a potential double up in the Arsenal defence. It becomes a little bit more difficult to be able to do that just given budget constraints. So yeah, I do think he is a fantastic option and almost sort of starting to look like Van Dijk did last season in terms of those attacking returns and goal threat from set pieces, but also the defensive contributions per 90 look really, really good. So yeah, for me, probably the best defender in FPL at the moment for consistency. But of course, that's going to be dependent on your budget as well.
Yeah, a slightly cheaper option then, Urian Timber at 5.9 million. Probably, I would say, is actually offering more attacking threat than Gabriel. Obviously, Gabriel, as you saw in the graphic just gone, his XGI is only 0.57 so far this season. You'd imagine that's from his goal at Newcastle. So, yeah, I think from an attacking point of view, the output is much better with the wing back, Calafiori included, but I think there's just more competition on that side with Lewis Skelly and Hincape, or however you say his name. So, yeah, I think Timber for me is arguably fairly nailed. I wouldn't say he's as nailed as Gabriel, but he seems first choice, that's for sure. It would not shock me if we saw a rotation, in Burnley away, for example. I think that's a definite game where you could see Ben White starting, for example. But I think long term, you're going to get a lot of starts out of him. Obviously, he's got 4 attacking returns so far this season with 2.3 XGI, which is absolutely mental numbers for a defender when we looked at João Pedro, who's barely brushed 1.5. So, yeah, really good data from Timber. What's your thoughts on him, Ben? Would you think it's too risky, or would you, if you didn't want to pay, was it 0.4, 0.5 more for Gabriel, would you take the risk?
Yeah, it's difficult to say really because we don't know too much on the rotation as of yet. Like we've seen a little bit, but we've not seen it enough. Look, if you want an minute security, Gabriel's the one to go for. A bit of a spicier pick is Urian Timber, definitely. So I do think, again, really decent option. All these Arsenal defenders are good options, and it's just a case of sort of, working out which one's going to play more minutes and which one's going to get you that attack and return. Timber seems to be a good blend of both of those. With the goals and assists he's got already this season, seems to be someone that offers something a little bit different in those fullback areas compared to his other options that Arteta has to play in that position. So at 5.9 million, still think he does provide that good value.
Indeed. So yeah, talking about players to sell, we're going to talk about Liverpool assets now. Obviously, just a bad week in general for them last week with the 3 defeats: Palace, Galatasaray, and then the loss at the Bridge to Chelsea. Fixtures over the next 4, not the easiest. United at home, which a fixture historically they do very well in. Brentford away has proven to be a tough fixture for United, Chelsea and Man City so far. Not a lot of goals in those games for either side. Obviously Chelsea scored twice, but it was a tough game for them as well. Villa at home, who look like they've sort of turned the page a bit since the start of the season. Europa League sort of helped them pick up some form. And then obviously City away. They then go on to a nice run of Forest away, I think it is, and then some of the newly promoted sides after that. But over the next 4, Ben, is there a case to maybe sell these Liverpool assets? I've got Van Dijk personally. I think it's an easy route to, some of these Arsenal defenders that we've just spoken about. What would you be doing if you owned the likes of Mo Salah or Florian Wirtz, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one, right? Because Liverpool traditionally have been so good. If you own any Liverpool defensive assets, it's a sell for me. The defense is not going to be a quick fix for me. The attackers are a little bit different because you can see them sort of hitting a switch and going, actually, they're starting to look quite good and they're always going to score goals. We know that for sure. For me, I'd lean more towards selling. I've sold both of my players in the Liverpool attack, Salah and Wirtz, and look, over the next 4 game weeks, they could start turning a corner and then, you can buy them back in for that fixture run. But for now, it looks like that the Arsenal fixture run, the City fixture run looks a lot better to attack. So, even from that perspective, it makes it a lot easier to sell them than if Liverpool were in pretty decent form.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And another thing to think about, which I was looking at just in this international break, is that we get those 5 free transfers for AFCON as well. So I feel like you can be a bit more bullish with your transfers because you're going to have a lot more later down the line. Obviously, if you haven't used your wild card yet, even more reason to take a risk on some transfers because you'll be able to bring these guys back in fairly quickly. Like we say, this is that 4 game week window where they've got some pretty tough fixtures, I would say. United at home, we don't really know how that's going to go because it's Liverpool have been in such a bad form. You can't even predict a United performance week in, week out at the moment. So, yeah, I think for me, no matter what asset they were, I'd be selling and then sort of assessing if they can improve over this next break before the next international break, and then we can start bringing them in for the easier fixture run, and then also knowing who's sort of playing in what positions, because obviously there's still those minutes concerns around Alexander Isak, Ekitike. Is Gakpo going to start week in, week out? Where's Wirtz going to play? So, yeah, for me, I think that's the most logical thing to do, especially as Ben mentions with the fixture runs coming up. Turning our heads then to captaincy, which is awfully ironic because we just said to sell Mo Salah, and he is top of the Fantasy Football Scouts captaincy matrix for this week. That home fixture against United, as a United fan, he scores every time. So, yeah, if you have him and you're willing to keep one more week, I'd certainly wouldn't hesitate armbanding him, to be quite honest. Obviously, Erling Haaland, who's turning into the template captaincy pick as of late, has a home fixture against Everton. He's second highest predicted points for this week. I imagine, Ben, he's probably going to be the most captain player this week, right?
Yeah, Haaland is going to be the most captained, and for me, it is a little more obvious than Salah as a captaincy option this week, just because the form he's in. Like, you just can't ignore that. He is unstoppable at the moment. So for me, a fairly easy decision. All the other captaincy options are going to be so much lower owned that you will just make the gains out of them regardless. So for me, it's a bit of a non-decision, unfortunately, which is a shame because obviously we love, the option of differential captains. But for me, he is so overwhelmingly the favourite for me for the armband.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that one. Although Everton defensively aren't a bad team, I think, well, we saw Michael Keane go off, I think, with an injury in their last fixture against Palace. Jared Brantwaite's on his way back from injury, but will they risk him straight away? So there's a question mark there. Obviously, just pay attention to team news on the Friday press conferences for that. So yeah, it could even be, a benefit there where they're going to have to play someone out of position potentially in centre back, which is great. Differential options. I certainly wouldn't be captaining Jadon Anthony, although he's the third highest predicted on this list with that Leeds at home fixture. Talismanic, definitely got the right sort of characteristics of a captain, but for me, a bit too differential for this week. I think genuinely you could maybe make a case for Bukayo Saka. Obviously, if they're going to score goals, Arsenal, he's usually involved. He's looked great over the international break. Obviously, scored against Wales, which was a cracking goal as well. So yeah, maybe Bukayo Saka, but like Ben says, if you captain Haaland, you can make the gains elsewhere. Even with Bukayo Saka, who we've just discussed, he's less than 10% owned, which is slightly criminal, really, when you put it into that perspective. Going into your guys' questions, then we put a little poll out in our broadcast channel on Instagram. So here's a few of them that we haven't already covered in the video. Fraser asks Ben, Voltamade or Bowen?
Yeah, really difficult one. For me, I think that Voltamada is just edging it for me because Bowen has been playing out wide a little bit for West Ham. There's still a lot of unknowns with Nuno and how he's going to set up and play with this West Ham team. Voltamada, we've seen him come in. We know he's number 9. We know he's going to get 90 minutes and he's playing for a Newcastle team that are playing quite well at the moment and will score against anyone. So for me, I'd say Voltamada. I'd also say that both are decent options considering sort of the limitations up front we've got.
Yeah, I think both are pretty solid. Obviously, Voltamada's minutes are fairly secure at the moment, like Ben mentions with obviously Vissa's injury. That looks potentially long-term as well. We haven't really had a clear update on that just yet. The only thing that I would say is with Jared Bowen, the fixtures right now look really good. And under that Nuno management, I think him actually playing out wide is slightly a benefit for him just from a goal involvement perspective. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I think both are good picks. You can't really go wrong with either, but I personally would edge it Bowen just a tad. FPL Elmer asks thoughts on owning Kudus and Sarr. I've been getting ripped on Instagram because a couple of weeks ago I said I wouldn't own Kudus. He's just got 2. He's only assists, and then since then he's had about 3 deflected goals, I think. So yeah, Ben, what's your thoughts on Kudus first, and then the idea of owning potentially him and Sarr?
Yeah, I mean, look, Kudus is a fantastic option and is getting the points. Much to Josh's annoyance, he seems to be firing on all cylinders. And Sarr, I don't think's the worst option in the world. I wouldn't be playing him every week. You can expect to return here or there, but nothing too consistent. So for me, I think Kudus is fine. You don't necessarily need to double up there, but yeah, I don't mind it. Wait, does he mean Ismail?
I thought he meant the Spurs Sarr, but maybe he does mean Ismail. There was no clarification on the first name.
Yeah, interesting. But if I had to, I guess we'll change the question a bit. If I had to pick one or the other, I'd be tempted by Ismail between the two, just because of sort of how consistent we've seen him over the last season and a half, really. So yeah, that I've changed the question.
Yeah, no. To be fair, now that I've thought about it, I think he does mean Ismail. So yeah, I would personally rather Ismail over Kudus. Like I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, he has got lucky with a few of his FPL returns, which is great for owners, don't get me wrong, but you take a look at the Leeds goal, it's got deflected and gone in from quite a low XG opportunity. I think the 2 assists that he had, I can't remember what team they played, but one of them gets deflected and he still gets the assist. So fair bit of luck, but that's what you pay for someone who's starting and playing 90 minutes. So yeah, I don't mind the Kudus pick. The fixtures are getting tougher now though for Spurs, so for me, he's definitely not a buy. If you've got him, by all means, keep him. But yeah, Sarr for me would be the much better pick, longer term as well. I just think Sarr has the ability to return against everyone. I just don't feel like that's the same level with Kudus yet. And obviously, there's probably equally sort of similar amounts of rotation risks. I just think Sarr, minutes-wise, though, is probably slightly better just because Palace just don't have anyone else, which is always a benefit. Owen Brian asks, best budget mids under 5.5 million. Tough question this, just because there's so many options to go for, and it seems like every week a new one emerges. We mentioned James Garner in the Gameweek 7 guide. I think for me, he is still a very nice option, and I'd still be considering him just from an overall aspect. I feel like he could return every week with his routes to points. Have you got anyone else, Ben, that's sort of on top of your mind?
Yeah, I mean, look, the 5.5 and under, a few of those have gone above that threshold now that are performing. Like you look at Caicedo, you look at even like Reinders above 5.5. Granit Xhaka's one that sort of stands out as fairly consistent for Sunderland at just 5 million. So don't mind that at all. In terms of others, maybe Donyell Marlon, if he can get together a run of minutes in that team, I think provides good value at 5.1. Same can be said for Emi Buendia. I think Aston Villa generally as a team can provide quite good value. So yeah, I don't mind that at all. But for me, look, I think like you said, there's a few different options you can go for, but Garner looks to be like a fairly consistent one anyway for Everton.
Yeah, Jaden Lancey as well. I think he's slightly above 5.5, like you say. There's a few of them that have increased in price now, but with the fixtures that Burnley have at the moment, I think he's a fairly good option. And like we mentioned on the captaincy part, that he is talismanic for that Burnley side at the moment. Charlie Bards says, Mateta to who? Obviously, Palace's fixtures are potentially a little bit tougher. Obviously, got Arsenal in a couple of weeks. What's your thoughts on Mateta, Ben? He's actually the most underperforming asset in terms of XG so far this season. He's got a massive underperformance on that. And who would you potentially move him to if you were going to sell?
Yeah, I mean it's a difficult one, right? Because he's been so consistent again in the time that he's been playing for Crystal Palace. For me, I think I'm still looking at João Pedro as a good option at that price point because of the fixture run. Jared Bowen and Voltemada, as we spoke about, are good alternative options. So I think you can look at that question at the top and go, actually, you can probably apply that sort of question at the bottom with Mateta there because, Voltemada, Bowen, good form. Good fixtures, as you said, for Bowen. So yeah, there's 2 or 3 options that you can move to. I do think currently, like the midfielders are performing better, so a 2-striker formation looks to be the play right now. But of course, it's very much dependent on team structure as well.
Indeed, I think for me, to be honest, I'd sort of question selling Mateta in the first place. Yes, the fixtures aren't as great, but you're getting someone there who is a talisman for that Palace team. Like I said, he's underperformed his XG massively, so he's not a bad finisher. I just think he just should take some more of his chances. He's also guaranteed to be on penalties for Crystal Palace, which is not something you can say about João Pedro, about Voltemade, or about Jared Bowen. They're all like second in line for their penalties at each club. Potentially different with João Pedro, as we mentioned at the start. So, yeah, for me, I think unless you're really wanting to get rid of Jean-Philippe Mateta, then I personally would probably just hold him. He can return against anyone. He's proven that, throughout the last 2 seasons of FPL. So, yeah, certainly not a must-sell in my opinion. So that wraps up our Game Week 8 guide. Apologies for my runny nose throughout the whole video. Hopefully that improves by Game Week 9, and hopefully the rank improves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I've been Ben.
I've been Josh.
And we'll see you guys
next time. Have a good game week, everyone.